Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unit 5, Land Use. This chapter, or this unit, Unit 5, is very unique because it's made up of 17 sections that are a little bit of a kind of a mishmash of different topics that we're going to see throughout this entire year. So we are going to do one section of the unit a week. And there are 17 sections. So we'll get about half of them done in the first quarter and about half done in the second quarter. So by the middle of the year, we will have completely done Unit 5 at home. So today we're going to start off with Unit 5.1. It's called The Tragedy of Commons, and you may see it abbreviated TOC. And it's kind of the overriding or overarching problem in today's environment. So let's kind of take a look at it. Whenever we do a chapter in here, or whenever we look at anything, all of our notes, they'll all start off with a decimal point. So here you got 5.1, the tragedy of commons. They'll all also have learning objectives and essential knowledge that is provided to us from College Board. And if you take it nice and slow and you kind of look at each piece individually, they really did a nice job tailoring their tests to these learning objectives, which is great. So here we're going to talk about what the tragedy of commons is. And then we're going to talk about how individuals are, in essence, using their own self-interest to further their gains, their monetary gains, while having zero regard for the environment and ultimately depleting the future resources. So let's take a look at some of the things that are kind of pillaged, if you will. So these individuals will use shared or public resources, and that includes open fields, forests, the ocean, and basically they degrade them for their own self-interest, aka money. And they must be public resources to be considered a tragedy of commons. If you own your own land and you destroy it, well, that's your own fault. But here, the tragedy of commons is publicly owned, publicly owned, open areas, big fields, big mountains, big forests, the ocean. And then they must be degraded, overused, and depleted in some way. Now, if it's managed properly, then life is great, but that's not the deal with the tragedy of commons. There has to be some sort of overuse or depletion. And some examples occur in what is known as overgrazing. So if it's a public land area and a farmer lets his or her animals eat all of the grass and things, it's now just dirt. Overfishing, we had a huge problem, or we still do, in the North Atlantic Ocean, which is really owned by no country, and everyone is just fishing every single thing out of it and not giving the baby fish time to grow. And also taking all of the adult fish that can't no longer have eggs or lay eggs. Water and air pollution are common, with factories just dumping things into the ocean, toxic materials, just pumping waste into the air because really nobody owns the air. And of course, just taking groundwater. Who owns the ground? And it all kind of flows together, and just taking this groundwater for watering crops is going to eventually be a humongous problem. These will all seem to repeat for some reason, but let's move on. So why does this happen? When no one owns any particular land or resource or air, they feel that nobody suffers directly. If you own something and you destroy it, then it becomes useless. But if it is public and you destroy it, then you can kind of say, well, that wasn't me. And they assume that if they don't overuse it, somebody else will. And in this little comic here, it says, well, there it is, the last fish in the ocean. And then he goes, woohoo! At least we beat, all these others to it. So that is the idea of the tragedy of commons. Take Don't worry about anybody else. And also, because this is public open ocean, there's no penalty. Nobody's going to be coming after you. There's no, you're not going to get fined for destroying these public places because, again, it's public and nobody knows it's you. There's a good, unfortunate, probably over in some third world countries where they just dump garbage directly into a river. It's terrible. So another problem, which was on our list, is overfishing. And it seems great to go on out and just go crazy catching whatever you can. And in this particular graph, and this will be something moving forward that you will be asked to kind of analyze, is there was a pretty steady Atlantic cod stock from about 1850 to around 1950. You know, there were some ups and downs in this area right here, but you can see that for this amount of time, this is a pretty steady number. Now, in the 1960s and 70s, something caused it to spike. Well, that something could have been anything. It could have been excess nutrients. It could have been the right water temperature. It could have been anything. There could have been a ban on fishing. Anything could have happened. Or whatever, they were, you know, humans got involved and helped spike the population of fertilized eggs in the water. Whatever, it doesn't matter. At some point, these Atlantic cod must have either had tremendous value or something happened. Now, once a fish takes on a tremendous value like bluefin tuna and swordfish, people are going to go out and try to catch literally every single one. And in 1992, you can see there that the population almost crashed down to zero. Now, this is a graph that's kind of hard to tell, but when the population goes down to zero, that means that there are no adults to spawn. And even in 2000, the comeback is nothing compared to what it needs to be. And at that point, several things are going to happen. One, the world may get involved, or people will just not fish for them anymore. And if the fishing stops and people stop going after them, maybe those numbers will begin to rebound. Maybe. But that's, again, the problem with overfishing. And once that fishery collapses, there's a loss of income, in some cases starvation, if there's a population that depends on those fish for their food. Air pollution. Let's get rid of this. Air pollution also from burning coal. You might burn it over here, let's just say, and it now travels over here. And in some cases, this, not on this particular map, but this could be hundreds of miles. So now these hundreds of miles that the coal dust is traveling is really affecting people's lungs. It's affecting people's health. So air pollution leading to things like bronchitis, asthma, and increased health costs. These are the things you want to look for in the question. You want to look about, if they're talking about air pollution problems, you want to think about air pollution related illnesses. Okay. Pesticide from runoff. A lot of us don't even think about this, but in order for grass to be nice and green, or for plants to grow and for us to have nice, delicious, big vegetables, there is a ton of water, pesticide, and fertilizer that's needed. And when it rains and the water falls from the sky and it hits that land, it's going to do what is called runoff, or it will infiltrate into the ground. Either way, whether it runs off or infiltrates, it could get into our drinking water supply, whether we take it from a reservoir or we take it from underwater wells. But either way, pesticides getting into the water, big problem. It could make people very, very, very sick. And again, that would be one of the negative costs of using these fertilizers, things like cancer. There are also oil rigs that are pumping oil out of from the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, and every once in a while they have problems and there's oil leaks, and those oil leaks can be a problem in the water as well as the coastline. And again, the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. So people are pumping, it's dripping out. And it was like, oh, it wasn't me. So how do we solve the problem? Well, we could have private land ownership, but then that kind of becomes monopoly-ish, but at least somebody's watching over it. Or the government can take over and be in charge of an area. They could put fees and or taxes on the use of the land, have some kind of permit system. And in Alaska, that's a big deal with the fishing industry. It's all about permits and quotas. In the event that you go over or you do excess pollution, tons of fines or taxes that could cut into your bottom line if you are a business. And you can have, again, very similar to the first bullet, parcel out the land and have an individual in charge of the area, whether it's a private company or a private person. Some examples: the Clean Air Act, trying to help clean up the atmosphere. Clean Water Act, trying to keep the water clean that we drink. Clean Water Act, keeping the water clean. Safe Drinking Water Act, keeping the water that we drink clean. That all kind of goes to fines and taxes and things to keep those people from just dumping it in. And then, of course, you have the BLM, or the Bureau of Land Management. And that is going to keep an eye on these large rangelands, especially out west, and collecting these fees from these ranchers that have, again, it's a really tough trade-off where Americans want this food, this beef, but these animals need to eat it, eat the grass and the wheat and the grain and everything that's on the ground. So it's a big kind of what do you do deal. But if you make the people responsible to kind of replant, then things might get better in the future. And one of the most disturbing things in my mind, because I've been to Hawaii and the water around it is absolutely gorgeous, is this thing called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the wind, it has to do with the currents, but it's all of this garbage, these plastic things that float, are all put together in this very concentrated area. And again, it is known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch because it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's not owned by anybody. Nobody's in charge of cleaning it up. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing because of the wind and ocean currents. They always seem to push these things that float together. And in some cases, it is, if you put it in, kind of clump it all up, it is larger than the area of the landmass Texas takes up. So it is absolutely tremendous and will be expensive to clean up. So of course, nobody's going to want to take that kind of responsibility. And finally, each one of these sections will end with an FRQ, or a practice FRQ. So there's a little space on your notes. Take a second to kind of look this over and do your best to answer it. And each week that these get checked, the notes will be just looked at for completion, and we'll go over the important points. We'll go over the answer to the FRQ question, and then we'll piece each of these sections in where they belong. So I guess we can say good news. First section is done.